Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact.
That's an incorrect statement. She knows that. She goes again, it's a lie.
That's absolutely not true.
Another lie.
Yet again, I said it at the beginning of this debate, you're going to hear a bunch of lies coming from this fella. And that is another one. Come on.
Okay, would you do that? Why don't you ask her that question?
Why don't you answer the question? Would you
because
veto?
Under Roe v. Wade,
answer the question, would you veto?
You could do a...
What's true and what's not true? Question that's been asked for centuries and centuries. So let's go ahead and do an objective fact check of the presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris with provided evidence. Will not be fact-checking policies, as that's not really possible, and will not be fact-checking the same fact more than once. So without further ado, let's go ahead and roll the tape.
Kamala Harris. Thank you.
Welcome to you both. It's wonderful to have you. It's an honor to have you both here tonight.
Good evening. We are looking forward to a spirited and thoughtful debate.
So let's get started. I want to begin tonight with the issue that voters repeatedly say is their number one issue, and that is the economy and the cost of living in this country. Vice President Harris, you and President Trump were elected 4 years ago, and your opponent on stage here tonight often asks his supporters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid.
Kamala Harris was indeed a middle-class kid, and looking on Wikipedia, we can find a picture of her house, and it was indeed a humble abode.
And I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America.
Kamala does have a plan, but she's not the only one. Typically, politicians do have a plan for inflation and the government as a whole, and this does not disregard Donald Trump.
I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. And that is why I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an opportunity economy. Because here's the thing. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing.
The United States of America does have a housing shortage. According to Zillow, which is a reputable housing estate, whatever you want to call it, from 2021 to 2022, the U.S. housing shortage grew from 4.5 million homes up to 4.3 million, and in 2022, the number of U.S. families increased by 1.8 million, while only 1.4 million housing units were built. So yes, there is a problem in the housing shortage in the United States.
And the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. My passion, one of them, is small businesses. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy. My opponent, on the other hand, his plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year.
According to this article that I found that is actually heavily against Trump, it states that Trump did say that there would be a boost in income, but there was really no change in the household income at all, neither negative nor positive, so Trump's tax cuts did not really affect anybody.
Because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
President Trump, will give you 2 minutes.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that.
Donald Trump has multiple plans for the taxing situation, but that does not include sales tax. Some include decreasing the income tax, re-implementing SALT, but the major one that everybody focuses on is his tariffs.
We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China.
As of currently, China almost accounts for $80 billion in tariffs. Now, this is under the Biden administration, which kept several of Trump's tariffs. So one could assume that if Trump came back in office, he would only up these tariffs and make China pay even more.
In fact, they never took the tariff off because with so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in millions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs and yet I had no inflation.
If we look purely at the facts from the last several presidents that we have, Trump has had relatively one of the lowest inflation rates, especially when compared to Biden. Trump's inflation rate is pretty low.
Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation has, which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, 80% higher.
Trump's numbers here for the inflation are relatively accurate if we just use two of the most common products that I could think of, gasoline and bread. Bread is almost up 60% from where it was 4 years ago, and gasoline at times is almost up 50%. So yes, inflation is increasing exponentially in the last 4 years.
They were just a few years ago. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country.
It is true that border encounters in the last 4 years have increased significantly, and I'm going to put a picture up, but just to remind you, these are border encounters, not the total number of illegal immigrants coming into the country. So the number here is much, much higher than you would see flowing into the country. And also, Donald Trump talked something about the crime rate, and for the most part, crime rate has been going down in the last several years, in the last decade, century. But there was a little spike in 2020 when the shift of office occurred that we had not seen until when Donald Trump switched office from Barack Obama.
From prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon. And you see what's happening. You see what's happening with towns throughout the United States. You look at Springfield, Ohio. You look at Aurora in Colorado.
I actually just made a recent video about Springfield, Ohio, in which it was proven that illegal immigrants are taking over homes and forcing out lifelong residents that have lived there forever as part of the government getting paid to take in these illegal immigrants.
They are taking over the towns. They're taking over buildings. They're going in violently. These are the people that Xi and Biden led into our country, and they're destroying our country. They're dangerous. They're at the highest level of criminality. And we have to get them out. We have to get them out fast. I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I'll do it again and even better.
We are going to get to immigration and border security during this debate, but I would like to let Vice President Harris respond on the economy here.
Well, I would love to. Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression.
This is true. Right before Donald Trump left office, his unemployment rate was at an all-time high, and some might say it is unprecedented or unhistoric, as we have not seen an unemployment rate like this in a very long time.
Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And what we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess.
The statement of cleaning up Donald Trump's mess is relatively shady, as if we look at previous data that we have displayed, such as bread pricing and gas pricing, the prices have not necessarily returned to the same level or same price that they were before Donald Trump was in office or during he was in office. So if you were to clean up his mess, I would consider that returning to the same levels. But I mean, if it was at an all-time high, which it really wasn't, and you returned it down, that would work. But I still don't see that as cleaning up a mess.
What we have done and what I intend to do is build on what we know are the aspirations and the hopes of the American people. But I'm going to tell you all in this debate tonight, you're going to hear from the same old tired playbook. A bunch of lies, grievances, and name-calling. What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025.
I actually had no clue what Project 2025 was before I made this video, so I had to look it up on Wikipedia. And basically the gist of it is a Republican Party ideological almost playbook in which the Republican Party is attempting to overthrow the government and replace it with almost of a tyrannical rule. Now, Kamala's point is a little bit shady. You have to figure it out on your own. But according to this source that I found, Donald Trump does have a 64% match rate with his policies and Project 2025. Now, considering that this is a Republican playbook, it doesn't surprise me. But then again, it is a tyrannical overthrowing government theory playbook, whatever you want to call it. So if you're really interested, you can do some further research, but I'm just going to count this as a shady point.
That the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again. I believe very strongly that the American people want a president who understands the importance of bringing us together when we have so much more in common than what separates us, and I pledge to you to be a president for all Americans.
President Trump, look at you, and if you respond.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas. I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do. Everybody knows I'm an open book. Everybody knows what I'm going to do. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy like I did before. We had the greatest economy. We got hit with a pandemic. And the pandemic was not since 1917, where 100 million people died, has there been anything like it. We did a phenomenal job with the pandemic.
Trump's claim that he did a phenomenal job with the pandemic is somewhat true, as in 1918 with the Spanish flu, 50 million people died, and as of currently, the coronavirus has only taken 1 million United States lives. And I know that times are different back in 1918 and that medical advances have stopped a lot of deaths. But still, considering that it is unprecedented and not a lot of presidents go through an epidemic, I would say that Donald Trump did a fairly good job with the pandemic and the coronavirus. So I would say that this is true, that he controlled it to some extent.
We handed them over a country where the economy and where the stock market was higher than it was before the pandemic came in.
I found this graph that depicts the stock market by presidential term in length of months, and it is true that the stock market returned to its former glory before the pandemic. As you can see on this graph, the red line is Donald Trump, and you can see the little dip. That is obviously the COVID-19 epidemic, and then it rises back up actually and up past before where it was during the epidemic. And considering that the epidemic was really big and really took a tank on the stock market, this is quite impressive.
Nobody's ever seen anything like it. We made ventilators for the entire world. We got gowns, we got masks, we did things that nobody thought possible. And people give me credit for rebuilding the military. They give me credit for a lot of things, but not enough credit for the great job we did with the pandemic. But the only jobs they got were bounce back jobs. These were jobs bounce back, and it bounced back and it went to their benefit.
You're not going to find any information on bounce back jobs, but if we take some common sense and think about it, you're having companies that are laying off employees and firing them because they don't have enough money to pay them. Then once everything settles back out, companies start employing and hiring more people. That is the definition of a bounce back job. So Donald Trump's statement here is most likely true, but I will not count it in the final tally for correct statements and false statements from each candidate, since there is no evidence that I provided.
But I was the one that created them. They know it, and so does everybody else.
Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond.
So, Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have reviewed our relative plans for the future of America. What Goldman Sachs has said is that Donald Trump's plan would make the economy worse, mine would strengthen the economy.
Goldman Sachs did comment on both parties' political plans, and he said that Kamala Harris's plan was better, but it was only 0.2%. And I think we can all agree that that is basically no difference. So this claim is false.
What the Wharton School has said is Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit.
This is true. The Wharton School of Finance said that Kamala Harris's economic plans would only increase the national deficit by 1.2 trillion, while Donald Trump's would increase the national deficit by 5.8 trillion.
16 Nobel laureates have described his economic plan as something that would increase inflation and by the middle of next year would invite a recession.
This is true. There have been multiple Nobel Prize winners for economics that have come forward and personally say that Donald Trump's inflation would be very bad and it might cause a recession. I will put those names on screen now.
You just have to look at where we are and where we stand on the issues. And I'd invite you to know that Donald Trump actually has no plan for you because he is more interested in defending himself than he is in looking out for you.
I went to the Wharton School of Finance, and many of those professors, the top professors, think my plan is a brilliant plan. It's a great plan. It's a plan that's going to bring up our worth, our values.
This point is a little shady, as it is true that Donald Trump went to the Wharton School of Finance for a time, but I could not find anything on the World Wide Web about somebody from the Wharton School of Finance supporting Donald Trump, so I'm going to mark this as shady and will not count it in the total, as I could not find any evidence for this point.
Country. It's going to make people want to be able to go and work and create jobs and create a lot of good, solid money for our country. And just to finish off, she doesn't have a plan. She copied Biden's plan.
This is true, as Kamala Harris has come out publicly as saying that she supports Bidenomics and many of her current policies do align with those of Joe Biden's previous policies.
And it's like 4 sentences, like run, spot, run. 4 sentences that are just, we'll try and lower taxes. She doesn't have a plan. Take a look at her plan. She doesn't have a plan.
Mr. President, I do want to drill down on something you both brought up. The Vice President brought up your tariffs. You responded, and let's drill down on this because your plan is what she calls is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board. You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country. As you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication, arguing it costs the typical family nearly $4,000 a year. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices.
I am by no means an economist, but I will say that tariffs are a little shady and that if done right, they can work, but if done wrong, they can go bad. But basically, if you don't know, a tariff is a tax on people importing goods to you or exporting goods to you. And basically what that does is it makes companies pay more. So it's going to basically, again, I'm not an economist, but in general terms, it's going to create less competition between small businesses and big businesses because small businesses don't have as much profit and stuff to spend on that extra stuff. So it's going to almost create a monopolization from the big businesses. And then from there, the big businesses, since they have a monopoly, they can just increase and fluctuate the prices as they want. So if done right, tariffs can work, but if done wrong, they can also go bad. So this is a shady topic, to say the least.
What's going to have and who's going to have higher prices is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years. I was the only president ever. China was paying us hundreds of billions of dollars.
Donald Trump was bringing in billions and billions of dollars from China, and more specifically, estimates round up to about 66 billion. And we know this as he used this to relocate to bail out farmers under the government program, where obviously if you're a farmer and you don't have a good crop yield, the government will pay for you to continue being a farmer and basically pay for your year's wages.
So were other countries. And, if she doesn't like them, they should have gone out and they should have immediately cut the tariffs. But those tariffs are there 3.5 years now under their administration.
This is true. President Biden has kept multiple tariffs on multiple daily goods in place under his administration.
We are going to take in billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. I had no inflation, virtually no inflation. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country because I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else. The people of our country are absolutely dying with what they've done. They've destroyed the economy. And all you have to do is look at the poll. The polls say 80 and 85 and even 90% that the Trump economy was great, that their economy was terrible.
This is true. There have been multiple polls conducted by multiple people that say that most Americans do think that Trump economy was better than Biden and that Biden's cost of living under his presidency was much higher than Trump's.
Vice President Harris, I just want to ask for your response. You heard what the president said there, because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America.
Donald Trump did have deficits in many areas, including trade and national debt, but his was not worse than Biden. And actually, his trading deficits were only in the billions, while Biden totaled up to the trillions. So yes, Donald Trump did have deficits, but it was nowhere as near as Biden. So this is a false accusation that Kamala is bringing up here.
He invited trade wars. You want to talk about his deal with China? What he ended up doing is, under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military. Basically sold us out.
Trump might have been doing some small scale selling to China in terms of chips, but actually it turns out that Trump was actually a big advocate against selling chips to China and actually implemented many restrictions on the selling, importing, exporting, all that stuff to China, including technology such as chips.
When a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century, which means focusing on the details of what that requires, focusing on relationships with our allies, focusing on investing in American-based technology so that we win the race on AI, on quantum computing, focusing on what we need to do to support America's workforce so that we don't end up having on the short end of the stick in terms of workers' rights. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet.
Donald Trump does actually thank President Xi multiple times. Sometimes it was economical, but there actually is one time that he thanks Xi for his transparency, which I think Harris is referring to. But yes, Donald Trump did thank President Xi, the leader of China.
Thank you, President Xi, exclamation point, when we know that Xi was responsible for lacking and not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID.
President Trump will have to respond.
First of all, they bought their chips from Taiwan.
It is true that Taiwan got most of its chips from China, approximately 40% from China, or $430 billion USD. But the also important thing to note that Taiwan is actually the world leader in chips. So it's a true statement by Trump.
We hardly make chips anymore because of philosophies like they have and policies like they have. I don't say her because she has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat.
I do believe that Kamala Harris is reaching out, branching out, changing views a little bit to try to reach some different voters, such as gun rights, as here recently she has been extraordinarily a little bit different, really pushing the point that she owns guns, and even going to the point on Twitter where you can find pictures of Tim Walz holding guns and stuff like that. So I do think that there is a little bit of reaching here for gun rights and voters such as that.
She's gone to my philosophy, but if she ever got elected, she'd change it, and it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor.
This is true. Kamala's dad did teach Marxism at Stanford University during his time as a professor.
Economics, and he taught her well. But when you look at what she's done to our country, and when you look at these millions and millions of people that are pouring into our country monthly, where it's, I believe, 21 million people, not the 15 that people say, and I think it's a lot higher than the 21. That's bigger than New York State pouring in. And just look at what they're doing to our country. They're criminals. Many of these people coming in are criminals.
This is true. Many of the illegal aliens that are coming across our border do have a criminal background. And actually, according to this article, which is a .gov site, the Border Patrol has recorded 43,647 arrests of illegal aliens with criminal backgrounds, which is actually a 99% increase from the 2017 to 2000 combined, and this was in 2021, which was the beginning of Biden's presidency.
And that's bad for our economy, too. You know, you mentioned before, we'll talk about immigration later. Well, bad immigration is the worst thing that can happen to our economy. They have, and she has, destroyed our country with policy that's insane. Almost policy that you'd say they have to hate our country.
President Trump, thank you. Lizzie.
I want to turn to the issue of abortion. President Trump, you've often touted that you were able to kill Roe v. Wade. Last year, you said that you were proud to be the most pro-life president in American history. Then last month, you said that your administration would be great for women and their reproductive rights. In your home state of Florida, you surprised many with regard to your 6-week abortion ban, because you initially had said that it was too short. And you said, quote, I'm going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. But then the very next day, you reversed course and said you would vote to support the 6-week ban. Vice President Harris says that women shouldn't trust you on the issue of abortion because you've changed your position so many times. Therefore, why should they trust you?
Well, the reason I'm doing that vote is because the plan is, as you know, the vote is, they have abortion in the 9th month.
Abortion is a very controversial topic that I will try to do my best to not cover too in depth and let you make your own decisions on that. But basically, the gist of it is, in the 50 states of America, there is no technically state that you can get a abortion in the 9th month, just like flat out, or after birth, just flat out. But it is very easy to work the system to get the abortion in the 9th month and even after birth, and states are actively working towards making that easier. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't cases in which that might need to happen, but many states such as Virginia and states like that are making it as where there's only one doctor needed to have an abortion for the woman's mental or physical health, whatever that may be. Now, I am sure that sometimes there are serious problems, but if there's a woman that is very convincing and there's only one doctor in the room and there's not actually really a lot wrong with her, then it is liable to get influence. So I am going to count this, that there are abortions in the 9th month, because I guarantee you that sometimes that doctors get persuaded, especially if there's one doctor, that it is very easy to get persuaded and you do have a abortion that probably shouldn't happen in the 9th month. So yes, abortions are technically not illegal in the 9th month and afterwards, but they are very easy to get around with. And another thing too, it's also if the mother mental or physical health, but also if the mother or whatever wants to, they will actually stop supplying life support for babies that have disabilities if the doctors sign off on it. So I would actually consider this letting the baby die. I would consider that an abortion. So after the baby is born and you just let it die, I would consider that an after birth abortion as well. So a very controversial topic, but you can make your own decision on that one.
They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby.
The governor of Virginia actually did say something similar to this, saying that to hand the baby off to the physician while the mother and the physicians talk about whether or not to kill the baby, whether if it has a disability or after a failed abortion attempt after the baby is born. And then also the governor of Virginia also supports bills that decrease the restriction to get an abortion in the 3rd trimester, which is like 8th month, 9th month, even lower, removing the serious bodily injury, quote unquote, sustainability and irremediability, which is basically irreversible damage, so that the mother can now get a 3rd trimester abortion, quote unquote, whenever she feels like it. So it's a lot easier to get a 3rd trimester abortion than it was before.
And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical in that. And her vice presidential pick, which I think was a horrible pick, by the way, for our country, because he is really out of it. But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month. is absolutely fine.
This is true. Walz has supported abortion in the 9th month and actually even gone as far as taking action to help teenagers get abortions easier, removing parental permission and removing a 24-hour waiting period. And then also, Tim Walz was also a big supporter of the disability child thing I was talking about earlier. Well, Tim Walz supports the abortion of disabled children and failed abortion of children after the birth, where there is basically an abortion through no treatment, so where they basically don't really attend to the child and just let it die, which is considered an abortion.
He also says execution after birth. It's an execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me, hence the vote. But what I did is something for 52 years. They've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states.
Undoubtedly, there are a lot of people that want Roe v. Wade back to the states, but according to a lot of surveys, the majority of people don't think that it should be returned to the states or actually disapprove of it being returned back to the states.
And through the genius and heart and strength of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do that. Now, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I believe strongly in it. Ronald Reagan did also.
This is true. Ronald Reagan did do a similar thing that Trump is doing in fighting to overturn Roe v. Wade when he was the president, which means you could draw some comparison between Reagan and Trump, although they still do differ.
85% of Republicans do. Exceptions. Very important. But we were able to get it, and now states are voting on it. And for the first time, you're going to see, look, this is an issue that's torn our country apart for 52 years. Every legal scholar, every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote. And that's what happened.
Again, there are some people that wanted it back to the states, but I think a majority of people did want Roe v. Wade to be overturned, and this is seen in a lot of major figures, especially from both parties, wanting Roe v. Wade to be overturned and not be brought back to the states. So I think Donald Trump does give himself a little bit more credit here, kind of glazing himself a little bit here, but I think he's false on this one. I think there are quite a bit of people that did want Roe v. Wade to be overturned.
Happened. Now, Ohio, the vote was somewhat liberal. Kansas, the vote was somewhat liberal, much more liberal than people would have thought. But each individual state is voting. It's the vote of the people now. It's not tied up in the federal government. I did a great service in doing it. It took courage to do it. And the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it. And I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact. Let's understand how we got here. Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did exactly as he intended.
Some of Trump's picks were a little shady, including some allegations of sexual misconduct against some, and then also the way that he implemented some is oftentimes considered a way that hasn't been done in a while, so it was a little shady and it was a little controversial. So yes, some of Trump's picks into the office were a little shady.
And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life.
If you are a doctor in some states and you help women get abortions, it is possible to be charged and then provided a sentence. And what Kamala Harris is referring to, that Texas has a range that the jury and that the court martial, whatever, will, it's from 5 to 99 years. So you're not automatically going to get a life sentence if you help somebody with abortion, but that is a possibility. So I'm going to count this as a little bit shady, as you don't automatically get a life sentence, but it is possible.
Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government and Donald Trump certainly should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country.
Kamala does make a true statement here that, according to polls that I used earlier, women in particularly, and larger than men or anything else, do disagree with Roe v. Wade being brought back to the states. And also, just something I wanted to mention real quick, in the next minute or so, Kamala Harris is gonna explain how they didn't want that, and I think it just completely brings out the black side in her, because when she starts talking about this stuff, I just imagine a black woman or a black mom getting onto her child. You didn't want that. Her dad didn't want that. It's just the funniest thing I ever seen. It's probably the funniest moment in this entire debate.
You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot? She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term? They don't want that. And I pledge to you, when Congress passes a bill to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. But understand, if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban. Understand, in his Project 2025, there would be a national abortion, a monitor that would be monitoring your pregnancies, your miscarriages.
Kamala Harris says something about Donald Trump tracking pregnancies, and I spent 20 minutes looking for a singular piece of evidence on this, but I legit could not find anything. So I'm going to count this as false, but I won't count it in the total since, again, I did not provide any evidence.
I think the American people believe that certain freedoms, in particular the freedom to make decisions about one's own body, should not be made by the government.
Thank you, Vice President Harris.
Well, there she goes again. It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban, because we've gotten what everybody wanted. Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else, and every legal scholar wanted it to be brought back into the states, and the states are voting. And it may take a little time, but for 52 years, this issue has torn our country apart, and they've wanted it back in the states. And I did something that nobody thought was possible. The states are now voting. What she says is an absolute lie. And as far as the abortion ban, no, I'm not in favor of abortion ban, but it doesn't matter, because this issue has now been taken over by the states.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if
Well, I won't have to, because again, two things. Number one, she said she'll go back to Congress. She'll never get the vote. It's impossible for her to get the vote, especially now with the 50-50, essentially 50-50 in both Senate and the House. She's not going to get the vote. She can't get the vote. She won't even come close to it. So it's just talk. You know what it reminds me of? When they said they're going to get student loans terminated, and it ended up being a total catastrophe.
Joe Biden's attempt to relieve student debt through the Supreme Court was indeed a colossal failure, as he didn't even come close to getting the votes. It was a whopping 6-3 decision, which is more than half, and they basically said that under 2003 federal law that he couldn't do it, and that it actually, I think people came to their senses that they couldn't just relieve $430 billion of student loan principal. So yes, this was a colossal failure, and he didn't even get close to relieving these student loan debts.
The student loans, and then I think probably her boss, if you call him a boss, he spends all his time on the beach.
This was something I was actually personally interested in, as it seemed a little odd that I don't see Joe Biden at as many public events as I have seen other presidents of the United States in the past. And according to some different news articles that I found, estimates range that he has spent about 532 vacation days in less than 4 years, which is about 40% of his time in office. And comparing this to the normal American, they say, who gets 11 days of vacation time a year, it would take them approximately 48 years to accumulate the number of days that Joe Biden has taken off. So from rough estimates, you could say that Joe Biden does take a considerable amount of vacation time.
But look, her boss went out and said, we'll do it again. We'll do it a different way. He went out, got rejected again by the Supreme Court. So all these students got taunted with this whole thing about this whole idea. And how unfair that would have been. Part of the reason they lost. to the millions and millions of people that had to pay off their student loans. They didn't get it for free. But they were saying it's the same way that they talked about that they talk about abortion.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. In all fairness, J.D., and I don't mind if he has a certain view, but I think he was speaking for me, but I really didn't. Look, we don't have to discuss it because she'd never be able to get it, just like she couldn't get student loans. They couldn't get student loans. They didn't even come close to getting student loans. They taunted young people and a lot of other people that had loans. They can never get this approved. So it doesn't matter what she says about going to Congress. So wonderful. Let's go to Congress, do it. But the fact is that for years they wanted to get it out of Congress and out of the federal government. And we did something that everybody said couldn't be done. And now you have a vote of the people on abortion.
Vice President Harris, I want to give you your time to respond, but I do want to ask, would you support any restrictions on a woman's right to an abortion?
I absolutely support reinstating the protections of Roe v. Wade. And as you rightly mentioned, nowhere in America is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion. That is not happening. It's insulting to the women of America. And understand what has been happening under Donald Trump's abortion bans. Couples who pray and dream of having a family are being denied IVF treatments.
This is not true. Trump is an avid supporter of IVF treatments, even going as far to force health insurance companies or the federal government to pay for treatment. And he is a leader in IVF, as he says he is, as this is practically unheard of, as most of America is under private insurance and private payments. There's no free public health care.
What is happening in our country? Working people, working women who are working 1 or 2 jobs, who can barely afford childcare as it is, have to travel to another state to get on a plane sitting next to strangers to go and get the health care she needs. Barely can afford to do it, and what you are putting her through is unconscionable. And the people of America have not, the majority of Americans believe in a woman's right to make decisions about her own body, and that is why in every state where this issue has been on the ballot, in red and blue states both, the people of America have voted for freedom.
Vice President Harris.
Excuse me, I have to respond. Another lie. It's another lie. I have been a leader on IVF, which is fertilization. The IVF, I have been a leader. In fact, when they got a very negative decision on IVF from the Alabama courts, I saw the people of Alabama and the legislature 2 days later voted it in.
This is true. After a ruling that Trump didn't like in Alabama, he personally spoke out about the matter. Then a couple of days later, Alabama changed the ruling and supported the IVF in the state.
I've been a leader on it. They know that, and everybody else knows it. I have been a leader on fertilization, IVF. And the other thing, you should ask, will she allow abortion in the 8th month, 9th month, 7th month? Okay, would you do that? Why don't you answer that question?
Why don't you answer the question? Would you
Because
veto?
under Roe v.
Answer the
Wade,
question, would you
you
veto?
could do abortions in the 7th month, the 8th month, the 9th
That's not
month,
true.
and probably after birth. Just look at the former governor of Virginia. The governor of Virginia said we put the baby aside and then we determine what we want to do with the baby.
President Trump, thank you.
We're going to turn now to immigration and border security. We know it's an issue that's important to Republicans, Democrats, voters across the board in this country. Vice President Harris, you were tasked by President Biden with getting to the root causes of migration from Central America. We know that illegal border crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration. This past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly. But my question to you tonight is, why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently for President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings.
This is undoubtedly true, as Kamala Harris was an attorney general before she became the current politician that she is, and Donald Trump has never been interested in law. So undoubtedly, I'm not even going to pull up any evidence, she has probably prosecuted some transnational criminals.
And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill, which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime trying to do their job. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. I know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl in our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress and said, kill the bill.
This is true. Trump did lobby against a bill that would tighten the borders and help with illegal immigrants, but he lobbied against it, saying that it would, quote unquote, clean up the Democrats' mess and make them look like they did nothing wrong. And I don't really care what your opinions are on this. I think it is pretty bad for any president to not strengthen our country by any means necessary, whether it looks good on him or not. It's just not a good look.
You know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And understand, this comes at a time where the people of our country actually need a leader who engages in solutions, who actually addresses the problems at hand. But what we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And I'll tell you something, he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer.
I'm actually a big conspiracy theory guy myself, and if we want to get specific, wind turbines do create noise pollution, which in turn, noise pollution has been proven to cause some types of cancer, especially prostate cancer. So yes, if we're getting serious, windmills can cause cancer.
And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires.
So I pulled up the latest Trump rally that I could find, and what would you know, 2 minutes in, Trump's very first lines, he mentioned something about the people, how they are hardworking Americans.
And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your
Well, I
response.
would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so? That would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the board.
First, let me respond to the rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's busing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you can end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs.
As I mentioned earlier, I actually covered Springfield in a separate video with heavy evidence, and the conclusion that I came to is that there are some minor reports, but there's been no hard evidence of people eating pets. But what there has been is an incredibly large influx of people and accounts of people eating ducks from public areas, and multiple residents in the area say that the duck population in Springfield, Ohio has decreased dramatically, almost to the point where they're not seeing ducks anymore. So not a lot of evidence supporting that they're eating the pets, but the immigrants are definitely eating the ducks and stuff like that.
The people that came in, they're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country. And it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here, you bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, let's see people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television saying my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from
But the
television.
people on television saying the
manager.
dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice
We'll
President
find
Harris,
out.
I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
Talk about extreme. This is, I think, one of the reasons why in this election I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans.
So I found this article from CBS News, and it does have some Republicans that have endorsed Kamala, but it is nowhere near 200. And I know that it's not going to be an extensive list of all the Republicans, as that would not be suitable for reader and revenue purposes. But if there were 200 Republicans that supported Harris, this list could be a little bit longer. And even from further research, I couldn't find a list of 200 Republicans that support Harris, or even 200 mentions anything along that line. So they're all Republicans that support Harris, but I'm going to count this as shady, as I could not find anywhere near 200.
Who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congressmember Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if you didn't make it clear already, just ask people who have worked with him. His former chief of staff, a 4-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit. His former Secretary of Defense has said the nation, the Republic, would never survive another Trump term.
This is true. A lot of people do talk bad about Trump, including the people that have previously worked with him and that he's fired. But everything that Kamala says here is true. All of these people had said these things, and there are also a lot of people in general that talk bad about Trump. So yes, Kamala is true in these statements.
And when we listen to this kind of rhetoric, when the issues that affect the American people are not being addressed, I think the choice is clear in this election.
President Trump, will give you a quick minute to respond.
Thank you, because when I hear that, see, I'm a different kind of a person. I fired most of those people. Not so graciously. They did bad things or a bad job. I fired them. They never fired one person. They didn't fire anybody having to do with Afghanistan and the Taliban and the 13 people who's were just killed, viciously and violently killed. And I got to know the parents and the family. They didn't fire. They should have fired all those generals, all those top people, because that was one of the most incompetently handled situations anybody has ever seen. So when somebody does a bad job, I fire him. And you take a guy like Esper, he was no good, I fired him, so he writes a book. Another one writes a book, because with me they can write books, with nobody else can they. But they have done such a poor job, and they never fire anybody.
This is true. Whenever you look up online Joe Biden firing people, the only thing that comes up is his quote-unquote firing spree when he first entered the office, where he fired a couple of conservative members of Congress and such not. But other than that, Joe Biden has not really fired anybody, if that. So yes, Joe Biden fired a couple people when he first got office, but after that he's fired practically nobody that has been made open to the public.
Look at the economy. Look at the inflation. They didn't fire any of their economists. They have the same people. That's a good way not to have books written about you. But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far. In fact, I got more votes than any sitting president in history by far.
This is just not true. Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden by almost 10 million votes. So no, Donald Trump does not have the most votes of any president. And I'm assuming that he's talking about the general population, because the electoral college doesn't really mean much here when you're referring to the people and that you got more votes.
Let me continue on immigration. It was what you wanted to talk about earlier, so let's get back to your deportation proposal that the vice president has reacted to as well. President Trump, you call this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. You say you would use the National Guard. You say things get out of control. You have no problem using the U.S. military. You also said you would use local police. How would you deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know you believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Yeah, it is much higher because of them. They allowed criminals, many millions of criminals. They allowed terrorists. They allowed common street criminals. They allowed people to come in, drug dealers, to come into our country. And they're now in the United States and told by their countries like Venezuela, don't ever come back or we're going to kill you.
This is true. Obviously, once criminals leave, countries don't want them back. And while there was a short stunt by Joe Biden to send Venezuelans back to their country, there was only about 1,000 to 2,000 people. And after that, there was no further initiative to send these people back. And ever since, the Venezuelan community in particular have been coming across the border illegally in high numbers.
Do you know that crime in Venezuela and crime in countries all over the world is way down?
While there are most likely other contributors to Venezuelan crime rate going down, such as them implementing new prison policies, the crime rate in Venezuela has been going down exponentially in the past couple of years. So yes, this is true.
Why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country. And this will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow. And I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes, but it's not worth it. Because they're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country. Millions of people let in, and all over the world, crime is down all over the world except here.
This is true opposed to many places in the world where you find the crime rate going down. The United States has a little bit of an opposite trend in the last couple of years where crime rate, and specifically violent crime rate, has been going up.
Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But
Excuse me, the FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud. Just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
President Trump, thank you. I'll let you respond, Vice President Harris.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted.
This is true. Donald Trump has caught quite the number of cases in the last couple of years.
For national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. And let's be clear, where each person stands on the issue of what is important about respect for the rule of law and respect for law enforcement. The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement, 45,000 agents.
I searched the internet and I could not find anything on Mike Pence calling to defund the police. There was a little something when the FBI searched Mar-a-Lago, which I have covered in a different video. But especially members of the Republican parties were calling to defund the FBI, and actually Mike Pence was against defunding the FBI and quoting that the defunding the FBI is just as bad as defunding the police. So no, I don't think that Mike Pence is for defunding the police.
This on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people, address what we need to do about the housing shortage, which I have a plan for, address what we must do to support our small businesses, address bringing down the price of groceries. But frankly, the American people are exhausted with this same old tired playbook.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
Excuse me. Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest of the appeal. And you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA of New York. Every one of those cases. And then they say, oh, he's a criminal. They're the ones that made them go after me. By the way, Joe Biden was found essentially guilty on the documents case.
This is true. Biden was found guilty on the same charges that Donald Trump was, in the charges of retaining information, past term, whatever it is, classified documents. But the reason that Joe Biden wasn't prosecuted is because, quote unquote, he was an elderly man that would be sympathetic to a jury. So yes, if you're going to say Donald Trump is guilty, then Joe Biden is also guilty of the same exact crimes.
What happened in my documents case? They said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete and total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they use it, and it's never happened in this country. They use it to try and win an election. They're fake cases.
President Trump, thank you. A really quick response here, Vice President Harris, on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again.
This is true. The Supreme Court did basically give the president immunity to not every charge, but most charges. And this doesn't just apply to Trump, it applies to all presidents in the foreseeable future. But yes, this is true. If Trump was to be reelected, he would have immunity to some extent.
Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guardrails, because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him. It's up to the American people
Vice
to
President
stop him.
Harris, thank you. Lindsay.
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president,
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy. It was a fake Russia investigation that went nowhere.
This is true. The Russia case came up in like May of last year, and there has still been yet really any incentive or action in the government to really do anything about the Russian case against Donald Trump. So yeah, it's basically went nowhere.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
So my values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss every one of it, at least every point that you've made. But in particular, let's talk about fracking because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States. And in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking.
This is true. Kamala Harris was the deciding vote for the Inflation Reduction Act.
My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history.
The United States is producing more oil now than it ever has been, but the increase part is not true. The United States increase in oil was probably under Donald Trump, but the increase is not the greatest that we've ever seen. But it is the most oil we've ever seen, just not the increase part. So it's like half true.
Because of an approach that recognizes that we cannot over-rely on foreign oil. As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times.
This is true. Donald Trump was given roughly about $400 million, and estimates do suggest that he has and his companies have filed bankruptcy about 6 times. So yeah, Donald Trump was given quite a lot to start out in life.
Is a value that I bring to my work to say we are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term. My work that is related to having a friend when I was in high school who was sexually assaulted by her stepfather. And my focus then on protecting women and children from violent crime is based on a value that is deeply grounded in the importance of standing up for those who are most vulnerable. My work that is about protecting Social Security and Medicare is based on long-standing work that I have done, protecting seniors from scams. My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down. And name-calling. The true measure of the leader is the leader who actually understands the strength is not in beating people down, it's in lifting people up. I intend to be that president.
President Trump, your
Well, first of all, I
response.
wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. Fracking, she's been against it for 12 years. Defund the police, she's been against that forever.
This is true. Joe Biden and his accomplice Kamala Harris are for the redirecting funding from the police to other areas, which is basically the definition of defunding the police.
She gave all that stuff up very wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar? She went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail.
This is true. Kamala Harris has come out publicly and said that she supports the MFF, which is the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which is basically raising bail money for criminals to bail them out of jail. So yes, Kamala Harris does technically support bailing criminals out of jail and helping them get out of jail.
She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison.
This is true. Kamala Harris does support getting transgender people required operations. And as I've mentioned previously with the abortion bans, which again is a very sensitive topic that I try not to get into too much, but required can literally mean anything. Like, you can convince one doctor that it was required. If you so much say that, oh, my mental health is harming because I'm not getting this operation, then in some instances you can literally get the surgery. And not to mention that all prisons and all county jails, they all are on taxpayer dollars. So yes, Kamala Harris does support all this stuff from taxpayer dollars.
This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns.
This is true. Kamala Harris is a big proponent on strict gun laws.
And she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. Just to finish one thing, so important in my opinion. So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before.
This is true. If we use the previous data that we've seen for oil production in the U.S. under Donald Trump's presidency, there was an exponential increase in oil production, more than we have seen in the past 20 to 40 years. So yes, you can see that Donald Trump got the oil production going like never before.
When they took over, they got rid of it, started getting rid of it, and the prices were going up the roof. They immediately let these guys go to where they were. I would have been 5 times, 4 times, 5 times higher, because you're talking about 3.5 years ago. They got it up to where I was because they had no choice, because the prices of energy were quadrupling and doubling. You saw what happened to gasoline. So they said, let's go back to Trump. But if she won the election, the day after that election, they'll go back to destroying our country, and oil will be dead, fossil fuel will be dead, we'll go back to windmills, and we'll go back to solar.
Again, if you look at the data for oil production in the U.S. and it does follow the trend that it has in the past, then yes, technically you could say that another Democrat like Joe Biden that enters the office, oil production would go down in the United States.
When they need a whole desert to get some energy to come out. You ever see a solar plant? By the way, I'm a big fan of solar. But they take 400, 500 acres of desert soil. These are not good things for the environment.
This is true. While renewable energy sources are better than fossil fuels, they are not all clean like people claim them to be. They still create pollution and still have problems themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have an election in just 56 days. And I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which, of course, we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out of the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on. Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace.
This is a very complicated topic that most likely requires an entire video on its appearances and timeline and stuff like that. But the only thing I'm going to say is that Donald Trump's speech, he started speaking, and before he even started speaking, the raid on the Capitol had basically begun. He started his speech at 12 o'clock, and the beginnings of the riot started at 11:50 p.m. And I'm by no means a psychiatrist or human behavioral expert, but if somebody influenced somebody else, they most likely had to be speaking directly to them. And if somebody's already started something without being spoken to first, most likely that person was not influenced. Not to mention, the people that stormed the Capitol before Donald Trump started speaking were nowhere near Donald Trump to hear him start speaking. So you can decide this for yourself, and this requires a lot of further evidence, but I personally do not believe that Donald Trump had too much terribly to do with the January 6th.
But we didn't do this group of people that have been treated so badly. I ask, what about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people that she allowed to pour in? She was the border czar, remember that. She was the border czar.
This is true. Joe Biden gave Kamala Harris the title of border czar and put her in control of most responsibilities retaining to the border of the United States of America.
She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said at the beginning, "Oh, I'm surprised you're not talking about the border yet." That's because she knows what a bad job they've done. What about those people? When are they going to be prosecuted? When are these people from countries all over the world, not just South America? They're coming in from all over the world, David, all over the world, and crime rates are down all over the world because of it. But when are those people going to be prosecuted? When are the people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted? Or in Seattle? They went into Seattle, they took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
But let me just ask
You might ask her that question.
You were the president. You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes,
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me.
This is true. You can find tape online of Nancy Pelosi saying that she is responsible and that she should have called the National Guard sooner. I'm assuming that she's trying to hide this or something, but there is quite literally video evidence of her saying that there should have been the National Guard called beforehand.
It was just 2 weeks ago. Her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of that tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi, but I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the president of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died.
This is true. 140 approximated police officers were injured on the day of January 6th, and well, she says some dies. Only one really died. I hate to be that guy, but you can't draw up mental health issues to one related event. Supposedly 4 police officers died in the following months because of the January 6th. You can't just allocate that to one issue or one topic. There's probably multiple things beforehand. They didn't just kill themselves because of January 6th. So this is true. 140 people did get injured, but only one person died from the event. Only one police officer died from the event.
And understand, the former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason. But this is not an isolated situation. Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side.
This is true. When referring to these events, Donald Trump did say that there were fine people on both sides, but where this gets shady is if we read just a little bit farther, Donald Trump says that there were people in the crowd that weren't troublemakers. He said there was fine people and troublemakers. So yes, he did say that there were fine people on both sides, but he also admitted that there were troublemakers mixed in with fine people. So I'm going to count this as shady, but you make your own decision on this one.
Let's remember, that when it came to the Proud Boys, a militia, the former president said, stand back and stand by.
This is true. Donald Trump told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. But if we look at the video and when he said this, the context is quite literally him condemning the Proud Boys. And
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name. Go ahead.
supremacists
Who
and
would
white
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because
telling them not to do anything. They're just playing on his language. He quite literally does the opposite of what they're claiming him to do. So this is completely and utterly false. Donald Trump does not support the Proud Boys publicly. Anyway, it's not saying that he doesn't. I'm just saying publicly he does not support the Proud Boys.
So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was, I say we don't have to go back. Let's not go back. We're not going back. It's time to turn the page. And if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you to stand for country, to stand for our democracy, to stand for rule of law, and to end the chaos, and to end the approach that is about attacking the foundations of our democracy because you don't like the outcome. And be clear on that point. Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath if this and the outcome of this election is not to his liking. Let's turn the page on this. Let's not go back. Let's chart a course for the future and not go backwards to the past.
Let me just follow up here.
It was a different term, and it was a term that related to energy because they have destroyed our energy business. That was where bloodbath was. Also, on Charlottesville, that story has been, as you would say, debunked. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Jesse, all of these people, they covered it. If they go an extra sentence, they will see it was perfect. It was debunked in almost every newspaper, but they still bring it up, just like they bring 2025 up. They bring all of this stuff up. I ask you this, you talk about the Capitol. Why are we allowing these millions of people to come through on the southern border? How come she's not doing anything? And I'll tell you what I would do, and I would be very proud to do it. I would say we would both leave this debate right now. I'd like to see her go down to Washington, D.C. during this debate because we're wasting a lot of time. Go down to, because she's been so bad, it's so ridiculous. Go down to Washington, D.C. and let her sign a bill to close up the border because they have the right to do it. They don't need bills. They have the right to do it. The President of the United States, you'll get him out of bed, you'll wake him up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you'll say, come on down to the office, let's sign a bill.
This is true. The president is in charge of foreign policy, which includes immigration and the border. And the president basically has full control of immigration enforcement, which would be border retaining stuff. So yes, the president can basically do whatever he wants to and sees fit to retain the border and stuff like that.
If he signs a bill that the border is closed, all he has to do is say it to the Border Patrol, who are phenomenal. If they do that, the border is closed. Those people are killing many people, unlike J6.
We talk immigration here tonight. I do want to focus on this next issue, both of you, because it really brings us this into focus, truth in these times that we're living in. Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short. Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge it at all. We said that sarcastically. You know that. And we said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it. And they should have sent it back to the legislatures for approval. I got almost 75 million votes, the most votes any sitting president has ever gotten. I was told if I got 63, which was what I got in 2016, you can't be beaten. The election, people should never be thinking about an election as fraudulent.
There were undoubtedly cases of voting fraud in the 2020 election. There's always going to be voting fraud, no matter what election you're in. Whether there was more voting fraud in 2020 than there was in any other election, it's up to debate. But look, realistically, you can go online to Heritage Think Tank, and they have all these evidences of people actually voting fraud, some 70 cases, some just voting twice, and there are a bunch of cases that they've come up with. But if you're losing by 10 million votes, the voting fraud's not going to do much for you. Even if you have a million cases of voting fraud, and I just want you to think about that, that's going to be quite a lot of voting fraud for people not to get caught and something to happen across a lot of states. It's just not possible that the voting fraud had any effect in the election of 2020, but there was voting fraud. So I'm going to say that the voting fraud, this is a true statement. There was voting fraud, but it did not affect the election.
We need two things. We need walls. And we have to have it. We have to have borders, and we have to have good elections. Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote.
This is true. Illegal immigrants cannot vote in national elections, but they can vote in local and state elections. And if you know anything about elections, and particularly the presidential election, you know that the Electoral College actually decides the presidency. So technically, yes, illegal immigrants do affect the run for president and voting for president.
They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm, lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them
No judge looked at it. They said we didn't have standing.
True, Trump has brought forth a lot of cases regarding the election fraud, and pretty much every single one of them were just dismissed by the courts. And again, not trying to be biased here or anything, probably rightfully so. It's a little outrageous to think that the election can be slipped by 10 million votes. Again, probably shouldn't have said that, but whatever.
That's the other thing. They said we didn't have standing, a technicality. Can you imagine a system where a person in an election doesn't have standing? The president of the United States doesn't have standing. That's how we lost. If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you do a special on it, I'll show you Georgia, and I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you, we have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter, because we have to solve the problem that we have right now. That's old news. And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that they lost by whiskers, so he still believes he did not lose the election that was won by President Biden and yourself. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks ago. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people.
I have genuinely no clue what this even means. Trump was fired by 81 million people. Well, first of all, if he's been self-employed since he was basically born, he's never had a real job in his life, so how can he get fired? And then secondly, I'm not sure if she said that he's fired 81 million people, if that's what she's trying to say, but even if she was trying to say this, it's still not true. Found this article on CNN of all places that listed people that he's fired, and there's only like 100 or so on there, so I genuinely have no clue what this means, but either way, it's just utterly false. It doesn't even it's not even comprehensible.
So let's be clear about that, and clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that.
Again, I just had to comment on this. It's just so funny. I'm having a hard time comprehending that. What does that even mean? I don't even understand that. That's like speaking gibberish. Of course, everybody's going to have a hard time comprehending that. I just had to comment. This is just so goofy.
But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump.
This is true. A lot of public world leaders have come out and publicly endorsed Kamala Harris and said that Trump's not really any good. But again, I'm not trying to get opinionated here, but if we think about it, don't leaders of countries want what's best for their country? And if another country is having a leader that would be worse, wouldn't they want that leader to be in there for their gain? Again, I'm not trying to press an opinion on anything, but just something to chew on.
I have talked with military leaders, some of whom work with you, and they say you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate and deny what over and over again are court cases you have lost because you did in fact lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about fact. That's deeply troubling, and the American people deserve better.
I'll give you 1 minute to respond.
Let me just say about world leaders. Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men, they call him a strong man. He's a tough person, smart. Prime Minister of Hungary. They said, why is the whole world blowing up? 3 years ago it wasn't. Why is it blowing up? He said, because you need Trump back as president.
This is true. People call Viktor Orban a strong man, and Viktor Orban is a very prominent supporter of Trump.
They were afraid of him. China was afraid, and I don't like to use the word afraid, but I'm just quoting him.
This is true. Mr. Strongman Orban does not get along well with China. So yes, this is true. Whether or not China's afraid of him, I can't find anything, but yeah, they don't get along well.
China was afraid of him. North Korea was afraid of him. Look at what's going on with North Korea, by the way. He said Russia was afraid of him. I ended the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and Biden put it back on day one.
This is true. Trump effectively shut down the Nord 2 pipeline. Technically, he didn't shut it down, but he basically made it impossible for people to use it because of so much taxes and stuff. But then a year later, once Biden got office, he pretty much pitched sanctions on everything, making it basically back to the way that it was.
But he ended the XL pipeline.
This is true. Joe Biden did cancel the XL pipeline. And the reason that these two are different, why Trump said that it's bad for Biden to cancel the Nord 2 pipeline, is because the Nord 2 is an international pipeline, which is the international stuff is like for environment stuff is what you get rid of. But the XL pipeline is in the United States, which is helpful to the United States. So that's why Donald Trump is saying that the XL pipeline should have been shut down and the Nord 2 pipeline should have been opened up. So yeah, Joe Biden did shut down the XL pipeline.
The XL pipeline in our country, he ended that, but he let the Russians build a pipeline going all over Europe and heading into Germany, the biggest pipeline in the world. Look, Viktor Orban said it. He said the most respected, most feared person is Donald Trump. We had no problems when Trump was president, but with this weak, pathetic man that you saw at a debate just a few months ago, that if you weren't in that debate, he'd be running on Senator Hersh. He got no votes. He got 14 million votes. What you did, you talk about a threat to democracy. He got 14 million votes, and they threw him out of office.
This is true for the Democratic primaries. Joe Biden got almost every single one of the votes, and Kamala Harris didn't even exist. She wasn't even running for president at this point. So technically speaking, the people did not vote for Kamala Harris to be running for president. They voted for Joe Biden. So yes, this is true. Joe Biden got all of the votes in the Democratic primaries.
And you know what? I'll give you a little secret. He hates her. He can't stand her. But he got 14 million votes. They threw him out. She got 0 votes. And when she ran, she was the first one to leave because she failed. And now she's running. I don't understand it, but I'm okay with it because I think we're going to do very well.
We've got a lot more to get.
Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris, in December, you said, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7th, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis.
This is true. On October 7th, Hamas did kill 1,200 people. And I'm not really that well versed in what's going on in the Middle East right now, so I'm not going to cover it that in depth because I generally have no clue what's going on.
Many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Because it is also true, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end. It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that. Work around the clock also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel and an equal measure for the Palestinians. But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
President Trump, how would you negotiate with Netanyahu and also Hamas in order to get the hostages out and prevent the killing of more innocent civilians in Gaza?
If I were president, it would have never started. If I were president, Russia would have never, ever, I know Putin very well, he would have never, there was no threat of it either, by the way, for 4 years.
This is true. Under Trump, there was basically no development in the events leading up to Russia invading Ukraine, whereas under other presidents there was quite a bit. But yes, there was no threats for Russia invading Ukraine while the time that Donald Trump was president.
Have gone into Ukraine and killed millions of people when you add it up, far worse than people understand what's going on over there. But when she mentions about Israel, all of a sudden, she hates Israel. She wouldn't even meet with Netanyahu when he went to Congress to make a very important speech. She refused to be there because she was at a sorority party.
This is true. There was a time that Kamala Harris just completely did not show up to a meeting with Netanyahu or speaking with Netanyahu. And for the record, I am no party animal. Obviously, I'm spending like 50 hours of my life making this video about some goobers debating for the presidency. But Kamala Harris was attending a sorority convention at the time, and some people say it wasn't a party. I'm not a sorority guy, but it's basically a party. It could have been important, but there are more important things than going to a sorority convention, so I'm going to count this as a true statement.
Of hers. She wanted to go to the sorority party. She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now, and I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population because the whole place is going to get blown up. Arabs, Jewish people, Israel will be gone. It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion.
This is true. Under Trump, Iran's GDP was looking like my bank account, pretty bare bones. Utterly obliterated would be a good term for it. And then under the Biden administration, like they invested in Bitcoin or something, it would skyrocket. So yes, this is true. Iran was practically broke under Trump, and then when Biden came along, they gained back power.
Because they took off all the sanctions that I had. Iran had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the 28 different spheres of terror. And they are spheres of terror, horrible terror. They had no money. It was a big story, and you know it. You covered it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Now they're a rich nation, and now what they're doing is they're spreading that money around. Look at what's happening with the Houthis and Yemen. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. This would have never happened. I will get that settled and fast, and I'll get the war with Ukraine and Russia ended. If I'm president-elect, I'll get it done before even becoming president.
Vice President Harris, he says you hate Israel.
No, that's absolutely not true. I have my entire career and life supported Israel and the Israeli people. He knows that. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality, which is it is very well known that Donald Trump is weak and wrong on national security and foreign policy.
A lot of this policy stuff is pure opinion, but Trump's foreign policy being bad is just completely false. His foreign policy might not be good, but of current presidents, Donald Trump is the only president to not have a global conflict during the time he was president. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or anything, but as has been said before, the president always takes the blame, and Trump never had a conflict, so you can't say that his foreign policy is objectively bad when you're looking at it from an objective point of view.
It is well known that he admires dictators, wants to be a dictator on day one, according to himself.
Trump did say that he wanted to be a dictator for one day, but in the context, he's obviously joking and expanding upon the point that things need to be fixed and that he would be a dictator for one day to fix everything. But yes, he did say that he would like to be a dictator for one day.
It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the hell he wants and go into Ukraine.
This actually is true. Trump has said things like this in the past, and he did say that he would encourage other countries to invade countries that don't pay their fair share to NATO. And this was part of his big push to get all the countries that are in NATO to pay, because not when he was president, not all the countries in NATO were paying their fair share, and the United States was spending a heavy amount of money for NATO, and they were trying to get other countries to pay. But yes, he did say this.
It is well known that he said when Russia went into Ukraine, it was brilliant.
This is true. Donald Trump did say that Putin was smart, and this goes for all world leaders. If you're going to run a country, most likely you're going to have some level of intelligence. And I think the thing that people don't realize is that there's a difference between calling someone smart and just like praising them. I don't think that Donald Trump was praising Putin. He just said that, Putin's a smart guy. He's not dumb. I mean, Donald Trump still said that he made a big mistake, but he just said that Putin was a smart guy. There's a different connotation between the way he used the word. But yes, he did say that Putin was a smart guy.
It is well known he exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un.
Donald Trump himself did say that he wrote love letters to President Xi, but he's obviously joking, and he even says it after they'll say that we wrote love letters to each other. And I just think it's funny how he's actually dead on that this goes for all politicians. They'll literally use anything, clip anything out of context, and they'll use it against their opponent. But no, he did not write President Xi love letters.
You go back and forth, and then we fell in love, okay? No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters. We fell in love. But you know what? Now they'll say, Donald Trump said they fell in love. How horrible. How horrible is that?
And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because there's...
This is incredibly vague. I have no clue what she means by this, but this completely contradicts her other statements in saying that foreign leaders support her and don't like Trump. And now she's saying foreign leaders do like Trump and don't support her, but it's all contradicting. But there's not adding anything, just saying that she's contradicting herself here.
So clear. They can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on national security, including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
And she's the one that caused it. That's weak on national security by allowing every nation last month for the year, 168 different countries sending people into our country. Their crime rates are way down. Putin endorsed her last week.
This is true. Putin did come out publicly and say that he supports Kamala Harris and that he endorses her for the upcoming political election.
Said, I hope she wins. And I think he meant it, because what he's gotten away with is absolutely incredible. It wouldn't have happened with me. The leaders of other countries think that they're weak and incompetent, and they are. They're grossly incompetent. And I just ask one question. Why does Biden go in and kill the Keystone Pipeline and approve the single biggest deal that Russia's ever made, Nord Stream 2, the biggest pipeline anywhere in the world going to Germany and all over Europe? Because they're weak and they're ineffective. And Biden, by the way, has paid a lot of money.
Thank you. We have a lot of issues to get to.
We'll be right back with much more of this historic ABC News presidential debate from the National Constitution Center right here in Philadelphia. Back in a moment. Historic ABC News presidential debate tonight. We're going to continue here, and I want to turn to the war in Ukraine. We're now 2.5 years into this conflict. Mr. President, it has been the position of the Biden administration that we must defend Ukraine from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, to defend their sovereignty, their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be able to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. You said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers.
This is true. Some government leaks have came forward suggesting that the death tolls in the Russian-Ukraine war are extremely underdeveloped, almost by 100,000 men or more in certain areas and battles dying than what is publicly reported.
Look, we're in for 250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars when I said, either you pay up or we're not going to protect you anymore. So that's maybe one of the reasons they don't like me as much as they like weak people. But you take a look at what's happening. We're in for 250 to 275 billion. They're into 100 to 150. They should be forced to equalize.
This is true. America is paying significantly more than any other country in aid to Ukraine.
With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason? He hasn't even made a phone call in 2 years to Putin. Hasn't spoken to anybody.
This is true. Biden has hardly talked to Putin as world-to-world leaders the entire time he's been in office. He's only spoken to him twice, actually. One of the times wasn't even in person. He's only spoke to Putin once in person, and that was at a summit meeting, like one of the first years he got into office in January. And then I believe the same year, at the very end of the year, December, when Putin first invaded Ukraine, Joe Biden got on a Zoom call with him and basically threatened, blah, blah, blah. But since that, Joe Biden has not talked to Putin personally since then. So, yes, this is true. Joe Biden hardly talks to Putin as world-to-world leaders.
They don't even try to get it. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win, when I'm president-elect, and what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened. And in fact, when I saw Putin after I left, unfortunately left because our country has gone to hell. But after I left, when I saw him building up soldiers, he did it after I left. I said, oh, he must be negotiating. It must be a good, strong point of negotiation. Well, it wasn't, because Biden had no idea how to talk to him. He had no idea how to stop it. And now you have millions of people dead, and it's only getting worse, and it could lead to World War III. Don't kid yourself, David. We're playing with World War III, and we have a president that we don't even know if he's... Where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify,
they threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? But we have a president that doesn't know he's alive.
Your time is up. Just to clarify the question, do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war? Yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done. Right, negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
I want to take this to Vice President Harris. I want to get your thoughts on support for Ukraine in this moment, but also, as Commander-in-Chief, if elected, how would you deal with Vladimir Putin, and would it be any different from what we're seeing from President Biden?
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up. And that's not who we are as Americans. Let's understand what happened here. I actually met with Zelensky a few days before Russia invaded, tried through force to change territorial boundaries, to define one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I met with President Zelensky. I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank, to Poland and Romania. And through the work that I and others did, we brought 50 countries together to support Ukraine.
I'm not sure if Kamala Harris is rounding up here or something, but officially speaking, there are only 41 countries that are currently giving support and have given support to Ukraine. So this is a little shady. She has brought together some countries, but she hasn't brought together 50.
In its righteous defense, and because of our support, because of the air defense, the ammunition, the artillery, the javelins, the Abrams tanks that we have provided, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country. If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. And understand what that would mean, because Putin's agenda is not just about Ukraine. Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Vice President Harris, thank you. We've heard from both of you on Ukraine tonight. Afghanistan came up in the last hour. I wanted her to respond to something you said earlier. And please, I'll give you a minute here.
Putin would be sitting in Moscow, and he wouldn't have lost 300,000 men and women, but he would have been sitting in Moscow, quiet please, he would have been sitting in Moscow much happier than he is right now. But eventually, he's got a thing that other people don't have. He's got nuclear weapons. They don't have to talk about that. He's got nuclear weapons. Nobody ever thinks about that. And eventually, maybe he'll use them, and maybe he hasn't been that threatening. But he does have that, something we don't even like to talk about. Nobody likes to talk about it. But just so you understand, they sent her to negotiate peace before this war started. 3 days later, he went in and he started the war because everything they said was weak and stupid. They said the wrong things. That war should have never started. She was the emissary. They sent her in to negotiate with Zelensky and Putin, and she did. And the war started 3 days later. And that's the kind of talent we have with her. She's worse than Biden. In my opinion, I think he's the worst president in the history of our country. She goes down as the worst vice president in the history of our country. But let me tell you something. She is a horrible negotiator. They sent her in to negotiate. As soon as they left, Putin did the invasion.
President Trump, thank you. You did bring up something. You said she went to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. Vice President Harris, have you ever met Vladimir Putin? Can you clarify tonight?
Yet again, I said at the beginning of this debate, you're going to hear a bunch of lies coming from this fellow. And that is another one. When I went to meet with President Zelensky, I now met with him over 5 times. The reality is it has been about standing as America always should, as a leader upholding international rules and norms, as a leader who shows strength, understanding that the alliances we have around the world are dependent on our ability to look out for our friends and not favor our enemies because you adore strongmen instead of caring about democracy. And that is very much what is at stake here. The President of the United States is Commander-in-Chief, and the American people have a right to rely on a president who understands the significance of America's role and responsibility in terms of ensuring that there is stability and ensuring we stand up for our principles and not sell them for the benefit of personal flattery.
You talked about Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. I do want to talk about Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of this debate. I want to move on to Afghanistan.
Said Trump did the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He got these countries, the 28 countries at the time, to pay up. He said, I've never seen. He's the head of NATO.
This is true. The head of NATO did thank Donald Trump for all of his work in NATO and thanked him for all of the money that they have raised from other countries contributing as well as the United States, and says that he hopes that NATO can keep up the momentum with other nations donating as it has never been done before.
He said, I've never seen. For years, we were paying almost all of NATO.
Even now, the United States is paying for most of NATO, and I couldn't find any real documents on prior expenses on NATO, but considering that the United States is paying for most of it now, I can only imagine what they were doing back in the day before Trump did come in and made these countries pay their fair share.
We were being ripped off by European nations, both on trade and on NATO. I got them to pay up by saying one of the statements you made before, if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you. Otherwise, we would have never gotten it. He said it was one of the most incredible jobs that he's ever seen done.
Thank you. I want to turn to Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of the debate, and we witnessed a poignant moment today on Capitol Hill, honoring the soldiers who died in the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I do want to ask the Vice President, do you believe you bear any responsibility in the way that withdrawal played out?
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan. 4 presidents said they would, and Joe Biden did. And as a result, America's taxpayers are not paying the $300 million a day.
Look, I am by no means a mathematician, but some simple math can easily prove that this is completely obliteratory and utterly false. Estimates say that we spent $2.3 trillion total dollars in the war for Afghanistan. Now, this was spread out over 21 years. So let's do some simple math. 2.3 trillion divided by 21. Now divide that again by 365 for the amount of days in a year. And if you count your places, trillions, billions, millions, thousands, 100s, you don't come to 2.3 million or whatever you said, Kamala, per day. You come to $300 a day that the taxpayers are paying. So no, taxpayers were not paying $2.3 million a day. They were paying a mere 300.
We were paying for that endless war. And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world, the first time this century.
If you look at the definition for deployment described by the United States military, it's just moving troops somewhere internationally other than the U.S. and residing there for a period of time. And if we take this definition, Kamala is wrong. United States troops are deployed all throughout the world. And as you may know, war zones are all over the world. Now, I'm not sure what she considers a war zone, but a place of conflict, I would consider that a war zone. So China, the Middle East, Pacific Islands, all those are places of conflicts, not necessarily war zones, but we have troops deployed basically everywhere in the United States. And I personally know someone that is actually being deployed to the Middle East, which is a area of conflict. Might not be a war zone, but it's an area of conflict. So this is wrong. We do have troops deployed all over the world, and some of them are in combat zones.
But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released.
This is true. One of Trump's advisors have came out publicly and said that Trump's deal was a little bit shady and was not too terribly good. And looking from the facts, this is probably true. There's releasing members of the Taliban. It's kind of shady, and the deal probably could have been better. Let's just put it that way.
And get this. And the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David.
This whole thing is a little shady, as there are a lot of details left out by Kamala here, but basically the gist is that Donald Trump invited members of the Taliban to Camp David for some peace talks, negotiations, whatever you want to call it. Trump just didn't invite the Taliban to come drink beer and look at hookers dance at Camp David. He invited them for talks, and then a little bit before it was about to happen, he actually canceled it, and they never met at Camp David. So this is true. He invited them, but the way that Kamala Harris brings it about is just a little shady.
A place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president, as president, invited them to Camp David because he does not, again, appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States to be commander-in-chief with a level of respect. And this gets back to the point of how he has consistently disparaged and demeaned members of our military, fallen soldiers, and the work that we must do to uphold the strength and the respect of the United States of America around the world.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, your response to her saying that you began the negotiations
Yeah, thank
with
you.
the Taliban.
So, if you take a look at that period of time, the Taliban was killing our soldiers, a lot of them, with snipers.
So I actually found a chart of deaths in Afghanistan by year, where the number on the far left is the number of deaths, and there were some soldiers getting killed in Afghanistan under Trump, but I think he's over-exaggerating a little bit. There was previously to the number of troops that were dying before Trump got office, there were not a lot of troops dying in Afghanistan. So this is a little bit of a stretch to be false here by Trump.
And I got involved with the Taliban because the Taliban was doing the killing. That's the fighting force within Afghanistan. They don't bother doing that because, they deal with the wrong people all the time. But I got involved. And Abdul is the head of the Taliban. He is still the head of the Taliban. And I told Abdul, don't do it anymore. You do it anymore, you're going to have problems. And he said, why do you send me a picture of my house? I said, you're going to have to figure that out, Abdul. And for 18 months, we had nobody killed.
This is something that Trump claims a lot, that for 18 months he had nobody killed. But if we do a little bit of digging here, a little bit of common knowledge, we find that 2 years is going to be roughly about 24 months. And my chart that I just used in the last check expands to 2018, which is 2 years before Trump's term ended. And if we use this, then even though our chart doesn't expand to the end of Trump's presidency, there has to be deaths in there somewhere. Because if we check a little bit, you would literally have to have 0 and 0. It would have to be on the end of the scale, and there were still people dying in Afghanistan. There's still news stories and stuff of people dying in Afghanistan. So no, Trump did not have 18 months of no deaths, especially considering, I don't know when he said this, but I'm assuming he got directly involved as soon as he got office in Afghanistan. So no, Trump did have people dying all the time in Afghanistan.
We did have an agreement negotiated by Mike Pompeo. It was a very good agreement. The reason it was good, we were getting out. We would have been out faster than them, but we wouldn't have lost the soldiers. We wouldn't have left many Americans behind, and we wouldn't have left $85 billion worth of brand new, beautiful military equipment behind.
This might be a little bit of a stretch by Trump. I'm going to count it as false, but the point still stands. What I could find, true estimates go from about 75 billion. So this might be a little bit of a stretch, probably not close to 900 million, but the point still stands that we left a lot of high-grade military equipment in Afghanistan.
And just to finish, they blew it. The agreement said you have to do this, and they didn't do it. The agreement was terminated by us because they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
This is true. Joe Biden did have a document in place for the way that the Afghanistan withdrawal was supposed to take place. And as you can see by the document, the withdrawal of troops was supposed to happen much quicker than it did. So, yes, you could technically say that Joe Biden did not follow his own document in withdrawing from Afghanistan.
And these people did the worst withdrawal, and in my opinion, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. And by the way, that's why Russia attacked Ukraine, because they saw how incompetent she and her boss are.
President Trump, thank you. I want to move on now to race and politics in this country. Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago, but she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
Honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was he owned buildings.
This is true. In Trump's early career, he inherited his father's real estate company and pursued that venture for quite some time. So yes, Donald Trump did start out in real estate.
And he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families.
This is true. The government did launch a case against Donald Trump in the investigation on him not renting to colored families. And there was actually a government ploy where they sent in two different, one colored and one white, and apparently Donald Trump did not give the colored one housing, but he did give the white one housing, and these were government agents that were sent in, and that led to the investigation. Now, from what I could find, apparently Donald Trump said that it was economical based, that he didn't like renting out his apartments to welfare recipients, so I'm not sure if the one that was colored was on welfare or not. But this is a little shady, and again, you have to make your own decision on this. Further research is required, but definitely something a little shady going on here.
Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young Black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5.
I mean, this is just a blatant lie. I mean, it is true that Donald Trump took out a full-page ad calling for the conviction, arrest, whatever, for these 5 people that were, if you don't know, the New York 5, Garden Square, the Central Park 5, they were convicted of rape on a New York jogger, and they were wrongfully accused. It was in 1989. They were accused of rape, and then in 1989, Donald Trump released the ads, which during this time they were convicted and they were sentenced. So Donald Trump would have thought that they did this awful thing, so he obviously would have published an ad. And then it wasn't until 2002 that they were found innocent. So this is just completely untrue. There's no way it could have been racially motivated if they were not found innocent until 2002 and Trump hit the ad in the newspaper in 1989. I mean, this is just like, if you have any previous knowledge on this, it's almost to an insult to intelligence. But that might have been a little too opinionated, but yeah, this is just completely false.
Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first Black president of the United States.
Trump spreading birther lies about President Obama is a little shady. Now, if you don't know, in order to be the United States president, you have to be a natural-born citizen of the United States, and natural-born citizen does not mean that you were born in the United States. Technically, it can mean a lot of different things, that you were, when your parents were a U.S. citizen at the time. I don't know. It is incredibly complicated to the point to where I cannot discuss it fully with you, and I cannot give you a true or false statement. But basically, Donald Trump doesn't believe that Obama was born in America, where apparently he had a birth certificate in Hawaii, blah, blah, blah. But the gist of it is, it's a little shady on both sides. Donald Trump doesn't have any real evidence, and Obama's birth certificate's a little shady as well. So it's shady on both. It goes both ways.
And I think the American people want better than that. Want better than this. Want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. I meet with people all the time who tell me, can we please just have discourse about how we're going to invest in the aspirations and the ambitions and the dreams of the American people? Knowing that regardless of people's color or the language their grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division.
Vice President Harris, thank you. Lindsay?
President Trump, this is now your 3rd time.
This is the most divisive presidency in the history of our country. There's never been anything like it. They're destroying our country. And they come up with things like what she just said. Going back many, many years, well, a lot of people, including Mayor Bloomberg, agreed with me on the Central Park 5.
This is true. Mayor Bloomberg, which is now a Democratic presidential candidate, did agree and take the same stance on Donald Trump when the Central Park 5 were originally being prosecuted and upheld in court. So yes, Bloomberg did agree with Trump during the original conviction.
Admitted, they said, they pled guilty. And I said, well, if they pled guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately. And if they pled guilty, then they pled not guilty. But this is a person that has to stretch back years, 40, 50 years ago, because there's nothing now. I built one of the greatest economies in the history of the world, and I'm going to build it again. It's going to be bigger, better, and stronger. But they're destroying our economy. They have no idea what a good economy is. Their oil policies, every single policy. And remember this, she is Biden. You know, she's trying to get away from Biden. I don't know the gentleman. She says, she is Biden. The worst inflation we've ever had, a horrible economy because inflation has made it so bad that you can't get away with that.
Thank you. Time's up.
I want to respond briefly. Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country. One who believes in what is possible, one who brings a sense of optimism about what we can do instead of always disparaging the American people. I believe in what we can do to strengthen our small businesses, which is why I have a plan. Let's talk about our plans and let's compare the plans. I have a plan to give startup businesses $50,000 tax deduction to pursue their ambitions, their innovation, their ideas, their hard work. I have a plan, $6,000 for young families for the first year of your child's life to help you in that most critical stage of your child's development. I have a plan that is about allowing people to be able to pursue what has been fleeting in terms of the American dream by offering a help with down payment of $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. That's the kind of conversation, I believe, David, that people really want tonight, as opposed to a conversation that is constantly about belittling and name-calling. Let's turn the page
Vice
and
President
move
Harris,
forward.
thank you. Let's turn to policy.
President Trump, we have to move on. President Trump.
Let's turn to policy, please.
To defund the police, she has a flat plan to confiscate everybody's gun.
President Trump,
She has
you
a
have to
plan
move on
to
to
not
other
allow
issues.
fracking in Pennsylvania or anywhere else.
Okay.
That's what her plan is until just recently.
I just think
President Trump,
the
President
former
Trump.
president has
No,
said
I'm
something
sorry.
twice and I need to respond to it.
I'm sorry,
I just
we're
need
going to
to
move on,
respond
Vice
one
President.
time to what he has
President
said
Trump, this is
multiple
now
times.
your third time running for president. You have long vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. You have failed to accomplish that. You now say you're going to keep Obamacare, quote, unless we can do something much better. Last month you said, quote, we're working on it. So tonight, 9 years after you first started running, do you have a plan, and can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health care.
Whether Obamacare is lousy or not is mostly up to opinion, but there are a lot of reasons why Obamacare is a failure or could have been better than it was. It is lousy, missed potential is a good word, but basically the gist of it is Obamacare increased the health care for everyday people, but decreased it for the disabled, whatever, the affordable health care for people that are not everyday. So it's one more step to not free health care. It's mostly up to opinion, but I will say most people that you come across, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, more likely than not, they're going to say that Obamacare could use some work.
Always was. It's not very good today. And what I said, that if we come up with something, and we are working on things, we're going to do it and we're going to replace it. But remember this, I inherited Obamacare because Democrats wouldn't change it. They wouldn't vote for it.
So I found this website that goes over every single time Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, has been voted on in the House of Representatives. And as you can see, it is quite the large amount, about 100 times that has been voted on. And you can't tell me that a act has been voted on 100 times and it is completely all a singular party's fault. As you can see in some of these graphs, some Democrats are voting, some Republicans are not voting. It's never going to be just one party's fault. If you vote on something 100 times, it is impossible for it to be just one person's vote, just one party's vote. There's going to be different votes, there's going to be differing views, and the House of Representatives is going to change over time. So it's impossible that just one party didn't stop the House of Representatives from getting rid of Obamacare. So I'm counting this as false.
They were unanimous. They wouldn't vote to change it. If they would have done that, we would have had a much better plan than Obamacare. But the Democrats came up. They wouldn't vote for it. I had a choice to make when I was president. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, never going to be great, or do I let it rot? And I felt I had an obligation, even though politically it would have been good to just let it rot and let it go away. I decided, and I told my people, the top people, and they're very good people. I have a lot of good people in that administration. We read about the bad ones. We have some real bad ones too, and so do they. They have really bad ones. The difference is they don't get rid of them. But let me just explain. I had a choice to make. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, or do I let it rot? And I saved it. I did the right thing. But it's still never going to be great, and it's too expensive for people. And what we will do is we're looking at different plans. If we can come up with a plan that's going to cost our people, our population, less money and be better healthcare than Obamacare, then I would absolutely do it. But until then, I'd run it as good as it can be run.
So just so yes or no, you still do not have a plan.
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if we come up with something, I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive. And there are concepts and options we have to do that. And you'll be hearing about it in the not too distant future.
Vice President Harris, in 2017, you supported Bernie Sanders' proposal to do away with private insurance and create a government-run healthcare system. 2 years later, you proposed a plan that included a private insurance option. What is your plan today?
Well, first of all, I absolutely support, and over the last 4 years as vice president, private healthcare options. But what we need to do is maintain and grow the Affordable Care Act. But I'll get to that, Lindsay. I just need to respond to a previous point that the former president has made. I made very clear my position on fracking. And then this business about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
As I've already covered before, Kamala Harris does claim to be a gun owner, but still supports strict gun laws. So whether this is just a political ploy to try to get voters or just try to increase the voting range, I have no clue. So I'm going to count this as shady, as I genuinely have no clue if she's actually for stricter gun components or if she's for taking away your guns. I have no clue.
As it relates to the Affordable Care Act, understand, just look at the history to know where people stand. When Donald Trump was president, 60 times he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. 60 times.
While it is true that Donald Trump did try to get rid of the Affordable Care Act multiple times, from my sources that I have found that are somewhat reputable, as you can see, Donald Trump got the presidency in 2016, and I'm not by any means a mathematician, but those numbers do not add up to 60. So Donald Trump did try to get rid of Obamacare, but it is nowhere near 60 times. So that's completely false.
I was a senator at the time when I will never forget the early morning hours when it was up for a vote in the United States Senate. And the late, great John McCain, who you have disparaged as being, you don't like him, you said at the time, because he got caught. He was an American hero. The late, great John McCain, I will never forget that night, walked onto the Senate floor and said, "No, you don't. No, you don't."
This is true. John McCain was not an avid supporter of Obamacare, and he also saved it in one of the final factors of voting against Obamacare. He walked into the middle of the House of Representatives or whatever, Senate, and he gave the thumbs down and said, "No, you're not getting rid of Obamacare." And this is probably one of the coldest, whatever you want to say, moments in modern politics, apart from stripping down and having a bare knuckle fight in the seating arena. But other than that, John McCain probably holds the single-handedly coldest bad moment in all of politics.
No, you don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. You have no plan. And what the Affordable Care Act has done is eliminate the ability of insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. I don't have to tell people watching tonight, you remember what that was like? Remember when an insurance company could deny if a child had asthma, if someone was a breast cancer survivor, if a grandparent had diabetes? And thankfully, as I've been vice president and we over the last 4 years have strengthened the Affordable Care Act, we have allowed for the first time Medicare to negotiate drug prices.
This is true. Under the Biden administration, the Health Care Act did get some surplus, extra bonus points, whatever you want to call it. But yes, the Biden-Harris administration did help lower Medicare costs, specifically in the drug position area.
On behalf of you, the American people, Donald Trump said he was going to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. He never did. We did. And now we have capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Since I've been vice president, we have capped the cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000 a year. And when I am president, we will do that for all people, understanding that the value I bring to this is that access to health care should be a right and not just a privilege of those who can afford it. And the plan has to be to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, not get rid of it, pass this roll up in terms of where Donald Trump stands on
I
that.
want to move to an issue that's important for a
She
lot
made a
of
mistake. And number one, John McCain fought Obamacare for 10 years. But it wasn't only him. It were all of the Democrats.
This is true, going back to our old reliable source of every time the government has voted on Obamacare. We can see that Democrats sometimes would not vote on the issue. And one of my favorite quotes ever, inaction is action. Basically, if you're not voting for it, then you're voting against it. So, yes, I would consider that some Democrats did vote against Obamacare by not voting for it at all.
That kept it going. And you know what? We can do much better than Obamacare, much less money. But she won't improve private insurance for people, private medical insurance. That's another thing she doesn't want to do. People are paying privately for insurance that have worked hard and made money, and they want to have private. She wants everybody to be on government insurance where you wait 6 months for an operation that you need to be.
President Trump, thank you. We have another issue that we'd like to get to that's important for a number of Americans, in particular younger voters, and that's climate change. President Trump, with regard to the environment, you say that we have to have clean air and clean water. Vice President Harris, you call climate change an existential threat. The question to you both tonight is, what would you do to fight climate change? And Vice President Harris, we'll start with you. 1 minute for you each.
Well, the former president had said that climate change is a hoax.
This is true. Donald Trump is not the strongest believer in the idea of climate change.
And what we know is that it is very real. You ask anyone who lives in a state who has experienced these extreme weather occurrences, who now is either being denied home insurance or is being jacked up. You ask anybody who has been the victim of what that means in terms of losing their home, having nowhere to go. We know that we can actually deal with this issue. The young people of America care deeply about this issue. And I am proud that as vice president over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy.
This is true. The Biden administration has spent over $1 trillion in clean energy sources and production, whatever you may say.
While we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels.
I have went over this before, but yes, the Biden administration does currently have the highest oil production in the entirety of the U.S. history. But this does not mean that they have the highest increase. Actually, probably they have the lowest increase, but they still do have the highest yielding in history. They don't have the highest increase, though. That probably goes to Donald Trump himself.
We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs.
This is just completely false. I have no clue where she's getting her data from, but manufacturing jobs have relatively stayed the same. The last time that they were down was when COVID was around, and obviously you're going to lose jobs during COVID, but manufacturing jobs have not changed in the past 5 years. This is just completely false.
While I have been vice president, we have invested in clean energy to the point that we are opening up factories around the world. Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs. And I'm also proud to have the endorsement of the United Auto Workers and Sean Fain.
This is true. The union auto workers, or the leader of the union auto workers, Sean Fain, did come out publicly and endorse Kamala Harris for the upcoming election.
Who also know that part of building a clean energy economy includes investing in American-made products, American automobiles. It includes growing what we can do around American manufacturing and opening up auto plants, not closing them like happened under Donald Trump.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
That didn't happen under Donald Trump. Let me just tell you, they lost 10,000 manufacturing jobs this last month. It's going, they're all leaving. They're building big auto plants in Mexico, in many cases owned by China. They're building these massive plants, and they think they're going to sell their cars into the United States because of these people. What they have given to China is unbelievable. But we're not going to let that. We'll put tariffs on those cars so they can't come into our country, because they will kill United Auto Workers and any auto worker, whether it's in Detroit or South Carolina or any other place. What they've done to business and manufacturing in this country is horrible. We have nothing because they refuse. You know, Biden doesn't go after people because supposedly China paid him millions of dollars. He's afraid to do it between him and his son. They get all this money from Ukraine. They get all this money from all of these different countries. And then you wonder, why is he so loyal to this one, that one, Ukraine, China? Why did he get $3.5 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife?
This is a very good question. Why is Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, why is the Biden family receiving money from Moscow? This is a very good question that, as a lot of things, requires further research.
Why did she pay him $3.5 million? This is a crooked administration, and they're selling our country down the tubes.
President Trump, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with closing statements from both of our candidates at historic night, this ABC News presidential debate from Philadelphia.
Davis.
Welcome back tonight. The time has come for closing statements, and Vice President Harris, we begin with you.
So I think you've heard tonight two very different visions for our country. One that is focused on the future, and the other that is focused on the past, and an attempt to take us backward. But we're not going back. And I do believe that the American people know we all have so much more in common than what separates us, and we can chart a new way forward. And a vision of that includes having a plan, understanding the aspirations, the dreams, the hopes, the ambition of the American people, which is why I intend to create an opportunity economy, investing in small businesses, in new families, in what we can do around protecting seniors, what we can do that is about giving hardworking folks a break and bringing down the cost of living. I believe in what we can do together that is about sustaining America's standing in the world and ensuring that we have the respect that we so rightly deserve, including respecting our military and ensuring we have the most lethal fighting force in the world. I will be a president that will protect our fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do. I'll tell you, I started my career as a prosecutor. I was a DA, I was an attorney general, a United States senator, and now vice president. I've only had one client, the people. And I'll tell you, as a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only thing I ever asked them, are you okay? And that's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on what we can do over the next 10 and 20 years to build back up our country by investing right now in you, the American people.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump.
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? She should leave right now, go down to that beautiful White House, go to the Capitol, get everyone together and do the things you want to do, but you haven't done it, and you won't do it because you believe in things that the American people don't believe in. You believe in things like, we're not going to frack, we're not going to take fossil fuel, we're not going to do things that are going to make this country strong, whether you like it or not. Germany tried that, and within 1 year they were back to building normal energy plants.
Finally, I believe that this is the last fact that I'm going to check for the 2024 presidential debate, and it comes from no more than the man himself, Mr. Trump. Germany, he said that Germany is not good with their, basically Germany failed with clean energy, and this is utterly false. Germany did have some issues in 2022, 2023 with some shutdowns with nuclear energy, but they reopened some coal power plants, but never built new ones, and they were right back to it right after, and they have one of the largest grossing economies in the world, so no, Germany did not fail with clean energy.
We're not ready for it. We can't sacrifice our country for the sake of bad vision. But I just asked one simple question. Why didn't she do it? We're a failing nation. We're a nation that's in serious decline. We're being laughed at all over the world. All over the world they laugh. I know the leaders very well. They're coming to see me. They call me. We're laughed at all over the world. They don't understand what happened to us as a nation. We're not a leader. We don't have any idea what's going on. We have wars going on in the Middle East. We have wars going on with Russia and Ukraine. We're going to end up in a third world war, and it'll be a war like no other because of nuclear weapons, the power of weaponry. I rebuilt our entire military. She gave a lot of it away to the Taliban. She gave it to Afghanistan. What these people have done to our country, and maybe toughest of all, is allowing millions of people to come into our country. Many of them are criminals, and they're destroying our country. The worst president, the worst vice president in the history of our country.
President Trump, thank you. And that is our ABC News presidential debate from here in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center. I'm Lindsay Davis.
And I'm David Muir. Thank you for watching here in the U.S. and all over the world, and from all of us here at ABC News. Good night.
In total, there was 133 facts checked, 14 pages of a Word document to use, 1,076 words written, and probably, I would say, about 30 hours of my life spent working towards fact-checking this debate. If you're using this to persuade you on who you are voting for the 2024 presidential election, do not let it persuade you. I am merely looking at the candidates themselves and whether they are lying or not. This has nothing to do on your personal beliefs, and I encourage you to go vote on November 5th for who you think should be the next president of the United States, as it is very important and your vote does matter. In total, let's start with Kamala Harris. I had 33 true statements, 10 shady or questionable statements, and 15 false statements. Donald J. Trump, I had 64 statements that were true, 4 statements that were shady, and then I counted 7 statements that were false. I usually don't say this, but if you're watching this, I would recommend you to push the subscribe button. That sounds really odd. I don't like saying that. I usually never say that, but if you're watching it, it really does help. And then if you could push the thumbs up button. Again, this stuff sounds really odd when I'm saying it, but yeah, if you watch 2 hours, if you wasted 2 hours of your life watching me talk, looking at my ugly face, you should most definitely do those things. That's about it. Stay safe and stay hydrated. Also, I used a Word document for this and all my sources, and I'll leave that linked below in the description.